call to order at 5:04 this evening. If we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, everybody. Next order of business is public comment. So just a reminder that we do offer both in-person and virtual public comment, always offering in-person public comment first. We do not really have anybody with us today. So we'll go ahead and open it right up to virtual public comment. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Devin will make sure you're unmuted, and just a reminder to give us your name and address, please.
I think we're all set.
All set? Excellent, thank you. All right, so next order of business is so we are going to have, we have 2 voting members in person. We have 2 online with us. So when we go to vote on a motion, and we can make sure that our 2 online unmute as we complete the vote. So can I get a motion to approve the attached May 25th, 2022 minutes? Motion.
Second.
All right, all in, or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion approved. Correspondence is item E. So this is correspondence received 5/24 to 6/6. So we do have 1 piece of correspondence attached that we're good for this one. Yep, so we are all set. As far as responses, but please take the time always to make sure we read the comments that are included in our agenda package. And I also take the opportunity as well to remind anybody joining us in the community to make sure to use that contact page that is on the landing page of our website. It's at the very bottom to ask questions, comments, concerns, anything that if you can't make it to a meeting with us in person, it's a great way to ask questions of the building committee. So we are going to go right into reports then. First up is chair report. I don't have anything specific because I think I want to do communications is when we'll do the community meeting update. I think it makes the most sense at that point to give everybody an update on how that went. But other than that, nothing specific for me. So we'll move right on to town council liaison report. Johnny?
We had a meeting yesterday, but there's not really much to report at this point.
Okay. Any questions or anything, Johnny? No? All right, we'll go right on to board of ed liaison report. Sarah, anything specific?
I don't have anything to report, but related to this.
Okay, thanks. Yep. All right, we're gonna go right on to 1928 building committee liaison report. Unfortunately, Chris couldn't be with us tonight, but you want me to read and then you can.
I can fill in.
Yeah, so he sent me a quick update that I'll provide, and then between Johnny and Pat, if you want to. Approved rules and procedures and statement of needs, reviewed a summary of the survey results, discussed the previous building tour and our takeaways, discuss the timeline of the committee, which is aggressive, a goal of a referendum of May 2023. So something for us to keep in mind as far as what that goal is. And the communication vision of the committee, which will be focused on finding and reaching a solution that suits all community stakeholders and proper and perspective and responsibly addresses one of our community's most valuable assets. Next steps, we discussed meeting with interested stakeholders to address and understand potential space needs for the building and move forward with getting an RFP out for architectural services that will be reviewed and assessed similar to the procedures for professional services on the building committee. So following a similar process there for professional services on contracts and assuming things like that.
Yep.
Anything else?
No, that was
Yeah.
very thorough.
I said the same thing. I'm like, wow, and that was intense. So we can give Chris a round of applause for that. Anything else, Johnny, you want to add on that?
Nope, that's it. Better than the update I got at council yesterday.
Well, it'll be in our minutes, so we can refer people that are need Okay, all right, so then we're gonna move right on to number 5, which is the owner's rep report. So Mark,
Sure, so a couple things, contracts for structural steel, peer review and code compliance review have been fully executed. Our next contract to award will be the independent testing labs, which we'll use a state contract for. So we should move to RFP out for that. The working group met to review the bids received in the enabling plan and discuss options to resolve some budget impacts. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for next week, the 15th, but we gotta make sure we've got some agenda items that that the working group's gonna need before we set that in play. The cost estimates are due late next week for our CD plan set. We have set a tentative cost estimate reconciliation meeting for June 22nd. That would be between ONG and TSKP's third-party cost estimator, PMNC. They use the same group they used first time around. And so that's tentatively on the calendar. We just need to confirm with ONG on availability in their team. There's a meeting with the public library staff this Friday to discuss site logistics and the impact on the enabling plan, temporary parking lot. And what that'll do to their day-to-day operations. So we'll just kind of talk through, tell them what's happening and field any questions. And we are preparing for our next design review meeting with the state, which is scheduled for July 26th. And on my report.
any questions or follow-up? Yes.
Are the dates for building committee approval and board of ed approval set? I can't remember.
I think the deadline was July 20th, Laura, is that correct?
The PCR meeting is July 26th. Did I put them in the schedule? I may have.
And I think we had a meeting already on it.
We have a meeting already on the calendar.
So we just have to coordinate to see if there's a
Yeah, I
way.
think it was
we
Board of
can do
Ed.
it combined
Right, we talked about during a combined meeting.
on that date.
Okay, to be determined.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have the presentation of building committee scheduled for July 20th. Is that regular
Yes,
schedule meeting?
that's our regular
And
schedule.
then I
meeting.
just held 3 days in there to get it to the Board of Ed between the 21st and 25th, so.
Well, and that's what we were saying, if there's any way we could do,
A
you know,
joint-
offer a virtual option and do a combined meeting on that 20th.
Yeah, that would be good.
Then you only have to do one presentation.
Say it again?
You only have to do one presentation.
That's good.
So more to come, Richard. We'll
Yep,
get that out.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions or updates? All right, so we'll move right on to item 6, which is architect report.
Yes, thank you. So as you know, ONG is estimating the pricing set that we delivered a while ago. We have received several questions from their estimators. I think there were a total of 9. I think we've responded to all of them thus far. But as they come in, we will address the questions. These are clarifications about scope. I think there was one question about a substitution. We have a student walker specified in the pricing set documents. And there was one request for a substitution. There was a locker I didn't recognize, don't know much about it. So we can talk offline about how to handle that. It's not a locker I'm familiar with, quite frankly. We hope to get from the vendors at the appropriate time, from bidders, sample lockers, because the real proof is in actually shaking them and slamming them and seeing how durable they are. So hopefully that will be part of the submittal process in the future.
Yeah, well, we'll follow up with our guys, our team, and see what they,
Okay,
what the reason behind that was, so.
okay.
Is it a locker manufacturer, meaning, Richard, like, or a type of locker?
No, it's still a steel locker of the configuration that we specified, the 2-tier lockers for students, same dimensions, but I'm just not familiar with the manufacturer. I don't know what gauge of steel they use. I don't know what kind of latching device they use and so on. So we'll continue that discussion. On Monday, on June the 6th, we had a PE and athletic staff meeting about the gym. We showed them the details that are in the documents. We had a presentation that we made for them. I think it went well. There's a fair amount of discussion about whether or not there should be an operable wall. So we're looking for, they may have an opinion, they may want to share that with the committee, and then we'll have to get a decision from the committee moving forward. And then today, this morning, we had a school safety and security task force meeting. It was a very good meeting. As I reported to that group, this was our third and final meeting with the group. I think we've addressed everything that's on the state's guidelines that were prepared by the governor's office as a checklist. It's a checklist of our own making based upon that report. And I thought it went pretty well. And then after that meeting this morning, there was a hardware meeting. I didn't attend the hardware meeting, but 3 people from my office were there. Sam was there, and there was also the hardware consultant that we sometimes use. He was brought into the meeting, and you also had a hardware vendor that you often use. And I think you said a little while ago that you thought the meeting went well.
Yes,
Hardware meaning like handles, doors, like that kind of.
door handles, keying, a little bit about doors. That sort of thing.
Yeah, there's
But
also.
not a door meeting.
Not a door.
Not in one.
So there were, what kind of hardware devices, what the locking mechanism is, and it's also powered devices as well, because sometimes in some situations you have card swipes, you have magnetic hold opens in some areas. For example, in the classroom pods, we have hold open doors that are typically held open, except in the event of a fire alarm or other signal, then they're automatically closed. And when they're closed, they're locked. So you create a whole secure area in the classroom pods. Those kinds of discussions. We did open up the discussion about signage as well, but I think they deferred any decisions until there's a special signage meeting.
Separate.
Right, I know. So, but we do have in the specs signage, and then I think the only issue is what the designations are. That is subject to change. When we actually have a vendor or bidder, there'll be a submission process. There could even be one more round of review of signage, names and numbers. But there's a placeholder in the specs for that. That's it from my report.
Richard, I may have missed it. Did you mention Connecticut performance?
No, I didn't. Great. So we had our second meeting about Connecticut high performance building standards. As a reminder to the committee, this is regulated by the state regulations. If you are building a building that uses state funds, which you are obligated to comply with what's known as Connecticut high performance building standards. And those standards are modeled after LEED. So if you're familiar with LEED score sheets, LEED certification, and it's equivalent to LEED silver. So we went through that workshop with our consultants. Sam was there as well, and we discussed all kinds of aspects about mechanical systems, energy performance, a lot of things. And we wanted to make sure that the design criteria that is in those standards is assigned to the appropriate design team or the owner in some cases. So like maintenance equipment and maintenance cleaning processes. So that meeting happened a week ago, I think. And so we need to write a memo about that. We'll work with CSG on that memo. That needs to be sent to the state reviewers as well. That's one of the items on the state's checklist to make sure that we have had these workshop meetings with the design team. There will be one more round of Connecticut high performance checklist and reports, and that will be done by the commissioning agent. This is the firm that you hired. IES? Yes, they're responsible for actually compiling the submission of material that's being used in the building. For instance, one of the Connecticut high performance requirements is the source of the material being no more than a certain distance away. You can't, it's a point system. So if you exceed a certain distance from the site, you may not get that point. You have to achieve a total of 28 points in their score sheet. So anyway, so IES will, at the end of the project, report how we did on the Connecticut High Performance Standards. And that is just something that's filed at the state at the end of the project.
Any questions for Richard? His update? Five groups so far. All right, so we'll go right into number 7, so construction management report.
Okay, so we met with the working group last Wednesday, and that's what's on the agenda. I'm sure we'll be talking about later on to go over the phase 1 bid as well as the GMP. So that's what we've been doing over the last week. And I do want to just come back to the building committee meeting, and Board of Ed is important for July, but also the fire marshal and building official for the sign-offs. Just making sure nobody's on vacation, so we ought to just, you know, have that lined up as well, just because when you're in July, it's really horrible to line people up, so.
When do you need those?
Well, when the building, this is once the code review is done and Taisu Kim has addressed the review comments, then we sit down just like we did for phase 1, they signed the cover letter, they signed the specs. It was a joint meeting that we all had.
Local,
Yeah, I just want to
Yeah.
coordinate, give
So
them a
it's
heads up.
anytime before July 26th. You know, somewhere in that week and a half leading up to that. And there's 4 people that we need, or was it 3? Because of
It's-
504,
oh, the 504 and
Nancy.
Local
Nancy's board, right?
you need Department of Public Health, so.
Yep.
So it's just those people as well, so I just want to kind of throw that out there, that we need to be cognizant of their vacation periods. And I have on this, there's nothing news to report on the schedule. I had in here to issue the notice received for phase 1 contract by June 16th, so if there's no action taken tonight, it's not going to impact our schedule as it is right now, because we do show up, we're still showing a July 11th start date for the phase 1 work. So no updates to the schedule, and the rest of it, I'm sure we'll be talking about later on.
Right, Denise?
Is there any way we could get some kind of communication that just outlines summer dates? And, you know, meetings potentially by someone, just because I definitely am going to be sending the board the July 20th, you know, hold the date. But if there's anything else, I would rather give them a heads up now in the summer. People start to go on vacation, so if there's anything else, it would just be really helpful. And I'm sure for you, fire marshal, or, you know, whatever else needs to get done, it's almost just a bulleted list.
I'm pretty sure up until this July 26th is what's critical. I'm pretty sure the rest of the summer, we're just gonna be bidding and vetting and stuff, so it'll just be keep giving you guys updates on things.
And I know I'm a neurotic person about the specs, but those don't have to be done prior to the 26th,
No.
do they?
They don't.
No.
That is good.
Yeah, I know. It requires 2 readings. That's why I worry about it. It's not like I can have a meeting and I'm done. I have to have 2 meetings before they're approved by the board.
Reapproved.
Reapproved.
Yes, that's right. Reapproved.
Yes, you're right.
I have an update on the question. I'll disaster early on.
Is that
Anything else? Any questions?
So why don't we move on to communications subcommittee report? So I'll start, and then we, just to give everybody a heads up, that's not on the committee, we normally have meetings right immediately prior to this meeting. We actually ended up canceling just because we had some things that we had completed prior, nothing we need to discuss immediately tonight, but the big update is really the community meeting that was held last week. It was small attendance, I would say. Overall, we had maybe 11 people.
There was, I think, 9 to 11 were online.
Yeah.
At various points, and I would count maybe
I think there was 5 in the audience.
5 in the audience. So it was pretty low attendance for us, but I don't know, Devin, can we tell if we've had any views after the fact?
Yeah, we can take a look.
Yeah.
On Facebook, and then we can check the YouTube video as well.
Yeah, just to see kind of what kind of, you know, it's tough. for people as far as scheduling and everything, but it was I think it was actually a really good meeting, and it helped us recognize that we need to do them more often. And I think it was really nice, I think, from the people that did attend, to have that level of engagement and be able to really ask questions of us and bring up really valid feedback. We thought we said really great things that we heard around communications and kind of next steps, getting clarification on things was really important, I think, and helpful for us to hear what questions were being asked. So this was really an update on the early enabling package. We talked about the overall timeline. We did a discussion on the project budget, as well as an update on state reimbursement and the change there. And then we did talk a little bit about the site plan. That actually generated a lot of conversation around the site plan and what's going to be included in early enabling and what those impacts are going to be. And then Kevin did a really nice overview of kind of the educational programming and mapping that back to the renderings and what, how important that is. And, we're looking at spaces and they look fantastic and beautiful, but what does that really mean from an educational perspective and a programming perspective? So I thought it was a really nice communication. So that's one thing I want to make sure that any way we can support people, other community members going out to watch after the fact. I think they get a really good snapshot of an update, plus some good questions being asked. So again, I think it was successful. I really felt, even with the lower number of attendance, very important, and again, made us really aware of how critical it is for us to keep doing those in-person engagements for people. And sometimes it's hard in these meetings where you give a public comment. There was much more back and forth and kind of a really collaborative conversation that I thought was beneficial. I don't know anybody else who's there, please jump in.
I thought it was a great discussion, great questions asked by the community members. And I think you're right, Meg. I think we need to do these a little bit more frequently.
We sent out a communication last week with the video, to all families, so that, and with a link to the video.
Good. Yeah, so anything we can do to promote it. It was in support of the newsletter that went out to the community, but it really enhanced that communication. So I think people walked in with their newsletter, which was awesome. I thought, like they had it, and to say, yeah, this was let me make sure that, all this information makes sense to me, and it drove conversation and questions. So I thought it's nice to see that continuity, making sure that people understand our updates and really, engaging with us. So.
And I think we also heard communication needs to be a little bit different for the abutting neighbors than it does for the whole community, because we talked about the early enabling package, and it was a high level overview, but the impact is much higher on the immediate neighbors. So maybe even another community meeting for that potential, I'm just thinking of options that we can help engage that, because it is a different conversation for the people that are going to be living and seeing and, being impacted by it than the people across town.
That's right.
And looking quickly at the Facebook numbers, it looks like we had 103 views on Facebook. Now, I don't know if that's for the whole presentation, the length of the presentation.
Yeah.
And then on YouTube, it looks like we have 45 views.
Right. Hopefully it's not like the same person. You never know.
Sounds impactful.
You never know. No, I think that's awesome. So and the more we can promote it, I'm sure Kathy, you sending it out makes a big difference. So anything we can do to do that, maybe we get it on our website,
Yep.
direct access for people and kind of drive them there, maybe do social media posts, do something around that. Because I really did. I was, it was exciting to come away from it with really good engaged communication, but also excitement around the project and next steps. So.
And it's becoming real, because people are now seeing the internal renderings, and it gets people excited. And, there are a lot of questions about, we haven't really touched base with the community in a year. If they're not paying attention to the meetings that we have on a regular basis, but it was a really nice update.
Yeah, and one thing we did here, which we expected, was questions around 1928. So we're going to have to do a really good job with that to make sure that I'm not concerned about us being coordinated from a project perspective, but communications and making sure people don't get frustrated of where do I go, who do I talk to? We just got to be as cautious as we can to make sure we direct people appropriately around both projects and that they're getting information. as quickly as possible for that. So I think the concept of it's different than the building committee made perfect sense to everybody. I don't think that was in question. It's just, well, but I understand that's probably going to impact this project, which is completely valid. So I think we just have to keep up and keep those communications going and make sure we're as clear as we possibly can be on that. Anything else for communications? Nothing else. Obviously, we keep talking, we haven't done it yet, but yes, the next big step is the committee for the groundbreaking, so that will come, I swear. So that's something that we will put on our plate as kind of probably the next big thing for us to really start thinking about. Because we won't do another newsletter until September-ish timeframe in preparation for that. So.
Well, I don't know if you remember, during our proposal, we get presented a kind of a leaflet that we hand out to neighbors. And is that something that we want to get moving for the neighborhood package? Meaning, and should we just draft up something ourselves and then?
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Maybe mark it our next, that can be a topic of conversation or our next communications meeting.
Okay.
Is just say, which wouldn't be next week,
It would be
if
the-
we keep that meeting, it would be the following week.
Which
If
would
that
give
makes
time
sense.
before early enabling begins. I think that'd go a very long way with the neighbors.
Okay, so then we need to do that really quickly, but.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if
Really
it's
simple
super
to put
involved,
together.
but yeah,
Yeah, no, we could, it's on one page. Yeah,
oh, perfect. Yeah, I
and
think-
typically our teams would just walk around the neighborhood and kind of hand them
Yeah,
out.
I think that's great.
And I think if the people are seeing other faces too, like, seeing some of the partners out there, I think that goes a long way too. That people know that there's other people engaged, so that is super helpful, yeah. Anything else on communications or any thoughts around that? Everybody online, okay?
Good to hear.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, I thought it was well presented. I think the three of you did an excellent job of putting it together. Richard, I told Kathy that you've got some competition in presentation of the interior.
I was channeling Richard.
Yes. The interior rendering. I think really personalized and brought the kids' needs into play, which I thought was great.
Well, I think what you had mentioned a minute ago about putting it in terms of program delivery
Yeah,
was very important, and coming from you, it's great.
and those are all things in terms and where that we're familiar as parents. All the things that you talk about, we can tie that, because that's what we hear in communication through the school anyway. So as a parent, I can make those connections, where the other communication with the school. So to me, it resonates in a different way other than the building. So it's kind of nice for me to hear it that way too. All right. I don't believe we have any professional partnership subcommittee reports, so we're gonna go right past that one and move on to financial reports.
And there's no update.
There's no
I did not send any.
Okay, so that ends reports. We're gonna go right into new business. So right up front, it is approval of invoices. So could I get a motion to approve the following invoice package included on our agenda? Motion.
Second.
Right, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Motion approved. Okay, so we're gonna go right into our main topic of conversation this evening. So this is really next steps in conversations on early enabling and more detail on that. So I am going to open this up and see if I can get a motion to approve the scope award letter to release Gerber Construction for a bid package 1.01 site work enabling phase in the amount of $1,815,000. So we're going to put that on the table as the motion.
So moved.
Okay.
All right, and then we're going to open this right up for discussion. So to get some additional information, and Mark's going to guide us in this conversation in addition to anybody else needs to chime in on this one, just to kind of give us an update on this And, we've been talking about getting updates, and I think,
Sure,
we got
so,
the details.
so a couple things, one, the second line item is to talk about the guaranteed maximum price for the 2,100,000. I think that conversation, the information we're gonna provide will probably blend between the two, if that's okay.
Yep.
And Laurel, I was thinking maybe the best approach for this would be to talk about what's in that GMP first, right? Because it has the highlighted bids that were received, and so sort of tells the story. And then we can kind of talk about how we worked to balance the budget, and then go from there. If that's an okay.
So to walk through the GMP.
So I think walk through the GMP, and then part of the GMP is Gerber's letter, right? Is that scope of work that we want to release Gerber with, and then we would kind of do, after that, I'll have Devin pull up some slides that just the updated budget summary, if that's okay.
So the GMP for phase one is literally only 6 pages long. For the phase two, it'll be a much bigger document. But this is just like a preemptive peek at what your phase two GMP would look like. So we have a cover sheet, we have a table of contents. Then we have, what's the most important thing is the GMP cost summary sheet, which is pretty much all the costs. Now, again, when it comes to phase two, it's gonna be the same format. It'll still have the construction costs, but it'll have, all the trade contracts, but it'll pretty much follow the same format. And really, everything else that's in the cost summary sheet is just kind of supporting documentation with how the costs were derived. So I'll just start with the cost summary sheet, the bid package 1.01 site work enabling phase, Gerber Construction is written there. So if you go to page 2 of 6, and you don't have to flip back and forth, or you can, whatever. This is showing you all the bid results bids that were received as of the bid due date. We had nine bids. We scoped and confirmed that Gerber Construction has the scope of the work covered. So they're the lowest responsible qualified bidder. So we're carrying their number back on the construction costs. And then what we usually do is the next page on the GMP, which is page 3, is a schedule of CM allowances. So what's going to happen, again, I'm putting this in context of phase 2, so it's not a surprising phase 2. Sometimes when we're doing scope review, we realize that something is going to get bought out because we owe you a guaranteed maximum price. So when the bids come in for all the bid packages, there may be some things, oh, we misassigned something or whatever. So that type of, we call it a CM allowance, will end up on as a schedule in the GMP. So for this particular phase, we had 2 allowances that we picked up just because of the bid that came in. We figured we ought to carry it just again, because we owe you a guaranteed maximum price. So the first one is additional temporary site security lighting as deemed necessary. When I was visualizing this project originally, the pedestrian path that's around the outside of our construction fence, I was not going to light that up at all. But as as discussions developed and whatnot, we thought, well, maybe you might want to add some lighting, or we might want to add some lighting later on. So this is an allowance that should we decide later on as a team that, oh, we think we need more lighting because we don't have any bought right now, here's a number for it. And the critical item to note with these allowances is this is the value we're including in our GMP. If we don't spend it, credit goes back to you. If we spend more than that, if it's suddenly, oh, we need 12,000, any fluctuation to these allowances, it's to and from the owner's contingency. Okay, so it's just a money hold for any particular scope of work that isn't bought with our trade packages.
And it's not expended unless we get the committee's approval.
Correct.
Or
Owner
subcommittee's
approval ahead of time, and you see the cost, and if there's any plus or minus, it's in and out of the owner's contingency, it doesn't go in and out of the CM contingency. And then the unsuitable subgrading, everybody knows that there's decent soils here, but just in case we do hit rock, we just want to have something in there. It's more about rock than anything else with the storm drainage excavations that we've got going on. Again, if we don't need it, it goes back to the owner. So you'll see those two numbers, 9,000 and 9,000 equals 18,000. Again, going back to the cost summary sheet, and I promise that's the last time I'll go back and forth. So that's where the 1,815,000 plus the 18,000 is the total construction cost for this phase of 1,833,000. We then are carrying CM reimbursables. This is our general conditions to oversee the phase one. I put in here the bid document printing and advertising costs because we place the advertisement in the newspapers. And everything beyond after the cost of the work is pure percentages based on our contract with the owner. So 3%, 1.25% fee, and then these insurances and bonds. It's merely a percentage of the cost of the work. So it's just explaining to you these four costs. That's all, so you understand where that's coming from. And again, when you see this in phase two, it's going to be the exact same format. It'll just be for the construction, it will have more trade packages up there. And I won't list them all. I'll just say, see trade contract summary, because I have a nice little sheet where I'm just going to carry the subtotal forward. But in the next phase, if you decide you want to accept alternates, all these alternates that we've been talking about, if we're going to accept them at the time of GMP, because that's usually when you do it, you award with the trade contract, there'll be alternates. So the only thing that's really going to change is the construction costs. So this is how the math all adds up to the 2,105,054. So that's the question on costs, because I just want to explain the rest of GMP and then we can focus on costs.
All right, and Michael's got his hand up. Let's just see if it's related to that topic.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Good explanation. Question about what might happen if in buyout of any of the materials or execution of this, that we exceed the 3% that's in the CM contingency. So in other words, something just in terms of pure cost should exceed that 60,000. Where does that come from?
I'm not sure. We're that 1,815,000 is the cost of this work. There is no escalation in cost. There's nothing in escalation in cost.
So Michael, are you asking if we missed some scope that's in the set of documents, where would that money come from? Is that the
I guess in
question?
phase one, you aren't really buying a whole lot of. This is more labor of moving things around, moving earth around and preparing, correct? So it's not like you're going to have a whole lot of buyout that you could be wrong on.
That's the same as phase two. When we present the GMP in phase two, it's going to be hard bid numbers that will include escalation. So it
won't include escalation?
will include escalation, yes.
So I guess what I'm asking is, if all of a sudden in the process of buying something out, it costs more than what the subs had bid or anticipated, like let's use an example, steel. What would there be a change order related to that? Where does the amount of money that you'd be paying come from?
They cannot charge extra money. If the steel costs them more, they have to eat it.
Okay. Good. Another question would be, and it's not in here, and I just don't know if it's something else that we carry as a part of this project for the school committee, or if it's somewhere else. Do we need a builder's risk policy, and how is that accounted for?
We do, and it's typically in the owner's soft cost.
Right.
Listen, Chris, right, Mark?
Right. Is it in some of these numbers that are here, or is that someplace else?
No, it's in the owner's soft cost.
And we've already got that secured. Do we'll have a phase in of that the builder's risk policy?
We will for phase two, yes.
So we won't have it in phase one?
I don't think we need it in phase one. We're not building anything, we're just moving. We can work that out and see if we need to provide it for phase one.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, can I just add one thing to add to the answer to your question? We talk about GMP, but I just want to say the obvious. It's a guaranteed maximum price, meaning you asked what would happen if the price went up. Well, ONG is guaranteeing that the price won't go up within the bounds of the bid and the contingency that they're carrying. So we have a mini guaranteed maximum price for the enabling phase. And it's the same language that would be in the overall project. For a fee, they're guaranteeing the price to us. So the only thing that the owner would be responsible for is things that aren't part of the documents. But they're guaranteeing the documents for a price.
Okay, and I get it that in here, there's in this phase one early enabling, there isn't a whole, there doesn't seem to me to be a lot of risk, but should there be something that is COVID related or supply chain related that escalates a cost in a way that is extraordinary, let's say above 8% or something, after someone has bid this package, what you're saying is there is no chance that under whatever the unique circumstances of why those materials will have escalated, that that would in any way eat away the contractor's contingency or the owner's contingency.
Michael, actually, in our contract with the with Farmington, we do have language there related to those types of escalation, and we are allowed to use our CM contingency for that. And
So that is exactly what I was asking before about should there be an escalation in any cost, and then so I do want to help me to understand how we will determine whether or not a circumstance would trigger a depletion of the contractor's contingency.
How about if a material isn't available and then you got to switch materials and there's a premium to that, there's a material cost increase? Because you can't get it, like, so let's say flooring suddenly becomes, you can't get it. You got to switch to a different flooring manufacturer, but that flooring costs a little more. The premium of that material, is that out of us or is that?
that would be out of us. That'd be out of the CM contingency.
And we have a clause about that in what the split is, I believe,
Correct.
if there is a premium.
Right. Michael, there's a certain percentage of CM contingency that would be allowed to be used should, and specific language to COVID. And then it goes on further to talk about if the supply chain issues, but specific to COVID, if situations ramp up and there are dollars that are assigned from that CM contingency, but then not used, a percentage of those come back to the owner, put back into that CM.
Yep, I understand the coming back. I'm just trying to figure out what would trigger the use of those or the trigger. So Laurel, if I think I overheard you saying that if a supply became unavailable and we had to purchase something else and that other supply cost more than the one that was originally spec'd, that would come out of contingency. Is that right?
From here, yeah, the premium, yeah.
And again,
The Delta would. I guess what I'm asking is more of a situation of, and I'll just use one item as a potential. Let's say we have bid steel and we're very clear on what the cost of the supply of the steel is. And now through supply chain problems, the price of the steel is now 9% higher than it was when the bids came back. Is there language that addresses whether or not that's something that the sub or the contractor bite, or is there some provision for the sub and the CM to come back and say, based upon this documentation, we believe that this is an area that we are not responsible for. It can be taken out of contingencies. Is that?
We do have language for that to address that issue, Michael.
What's that?
We do have language within the contract,
Okay.
our contract with the town, to address that.
Okay, it'd be helpful just to, as we get to each, I'm probably a little, I'm raising this now because we are doing a GMP for this. My gut tells me there's less of a risk associated with this, first GMP, but perhaps more of a risk with a second GMP. And so if there's a way you could just circulate that particular provision in whatever language it sits right now, it'd be helpful just to read that. It doesn't have to be tonight, but just as a follow-up, it would be helpful to understand the mechanism of how that would work. And if for some reason, through buyout or through escalation of costs, those numbers should consume the construction manager contingency, is there a provision that it would ever kick into the owner's contingency?
let's review that language, because we did
It's
modify
been-
it. Yeah, we modified it a number of times. So, Michael, we'll get that
Yeah.
language.
That's great. Just know that that's just a point of concern. As I say, I don't think it's that big of a deal when we're talking about a $60,000 contingency for this first phase. But if we could just make certain that we have that language right and that all the building committee members are comfortable with what that means. I think that there are risks associated with this in particular, and we just want to make certain that everybody kind of goes in with their eyes wide open. Thank you.
I did have a question, but the discussion that followed answered the question that I was going to try to elaborate. And it had to do with Michael Smith's question about, he said $60,000, but if you look at page 1 of 6, it's 59,000 and change. I think that's what the figure he was referring to. Anyway, I think the question has been answered. Thank you.
All right, so if there's no more costs or questions on the cost, let me just explain the rest of the documentation that's in the GMP. So I talked about the CM allowances, and again, there will be a similar schedule to this in phase 2. Pages 4 and 5 are what we call the meat of the GMP as far as reading the fine print. So I'm gonna skip over that for a second. And the last part of the GMP is the actual documents on which GMP is based. So this ties in the actual bid drawings, it ties in the specification and any sort of addenda or contract. So we're saying that our guarantee maximum price is based on these documents. So it's really anything that's not on these documents is basically not coming out of CM contingency. That's kind of how you look at that. So these are the bid documents. And again, I'm sure the one for phase 2 is going to be 10 pages long because there'll be that many more documents. This is just a 1-pager. So back on the meat of the meat and the potatoes. So pages 4 and 5 are what we call qualifications, assumptions, qualifications, exclusions, and clarifications. So this is, it's supposed to let you know what's in, what's out. And if you want, I can walk you through them all, or if people want to just take time to absorb them. There's literally only 16, so it won't take me that long to explain each one. Whatever you'd like me to do with that. And again, for phase 2, it'll probably be 4 pages long. For this particular phase, you want me to do item 16, which kind of is part and parcel of the scope award letter, that our schedule and our costs are based upon receiving approvals GMP no later than June 15th, which is next Wednesday. So meaning we have us starting on site July 11th. So if we don't meet that, I can't guarantee that we're going to start on site July 11th. The construction costs, the big costs, they have to hold their number for a little while. I think I have under 45 days. I might even have 90, I'm not sure. But in order for us to do what we need to do, we need to move this forward. If not tonight, it has to be next week, or we will not be done in time for the start of school of what we wanted to do. Mainly that temporary parking lot, everything that's in the existing parking lot. But if you want, I can walk you through the rest of the clarifications as well, or whatever your pleasure is.
Hard reading. What, as a committee, how do you feel? Do you want to take a second to walk through these, or do you want to, and I read them once before prior, but I don't know, have an explanation as a benefit?
We certainly can go through them. They're I think for clarity, we might as well take a few minutes and just run through them if that's okay with you all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not including any permit fees at this time because we're not planning on pulling a permit for this phase 1 work. We're saying that we're basically tax exempt. We've excluded the following costs, which is usually costs that are provided in the owner's soft costs. So moving, relocation, planning, any sort of third-party inspections, which Mark was talking about, the construction materials testing, we're going to need that. So that's part of your costs. Air wipe testing, indoor air quality testing. In other words, those are all items that are usually owner's soft costs. The following, number 4, says it's based on the following assumptions for fuel consumption and utility connections and consumption, because again, while we're building, who's paying for the electric, who's paying when it comes to temporary heat, when we actually have this building going up and over winters, who's going to be responsible for all that? So in this case, it's just phase 1, so it's pretty basic. Temporary utility connections in order to complete construction are included in the GMP, so the owner's not gonna need to pay for anything. It's in the bid, it's in the contractor's bid price. Utility consumption charges for fuel, water, and temporary power and or permanent power to support construction activities are included in the GMP. So in this particular case, everything's in our GMP. GMP includes the cost of printing and bid documents and the cost of advertising. That's what you saw in your cost summary. Salvaging of existing items as identified in the bid documents is included in the GMP. There was quite a bit of it on the drawings. I spelled construction wrong. Construction manager shall coordinate with the owner, the removal of salvaged materials for the owner. The off-site transportation of salvaged items is the responsibility of the owner and is excluded from this GMP. So everything that you guys want saved, the chain link fencing, granite curbing, everything we are, making it nice and neat, but you guys need to haul it off.
I would say Laura with the exception of the topsoil, right? If there's a
Topsoil,
large amount of
yeah,
topsoil,
we're not I don't really consider it salvaging, but you're right, we'll be offloading that somewhere. Exhibit B talks about these CM allowances that are included in the GMP, except as provided for in the owner CM agreement, which whatever the nuances are there. None of these allowances will be expended without prior approval by the owner. Sometimes there's a cap of 5,000 or whatever, who knows. The owner is responsible for all costs exceeding the established allowance amounts. 8 says GMP includes work indicated in the bid documents listed in Exhibit C. GMP excludes all costs associated with any other sketches, ASIs, or revisions issued subsequent to the bid documents referenced herein. Sometimes, clarifications are issued, may not have made it in, so that's why we're very clear. At the time of bid, we issued bid documents, we issued addenda, that's what's based on. Number 9 says GMP includes construction phase CMP for phase 1 portion only. Number 10 says our reimbursables are based on general conditions from basically July 1 through September 1, including closeout. Additional CM reimbursable fees will be billed beyond this time frame if additional time is added on to phase 1 through delays not caused by the contractor, including weather delays or additional scope of work. So we're going to be on site for a certain amount of time, and if something gets added on through not our fault, that's where that comes in. 11 says the existing tennis court shall remain available for use by the owner until the first calendar day of the 2022-2023 school year. Number 12 is more of a technical item. There was a note on a particular drawing, contractor to replace weir with an existing Vortechnics model 11,000 water quality unit. That's what the note said. So when we asked our contractor, what is that? He included a certain value for what he needed to do for that, for replacing the overflow weir located above the swirl chamber. That's kind of a clarification that we received after the fact. If more work than that is required for this unit, we're saying you guys will have to fund it, because that's, we had a note, that's what the guy included, that's what he included it for. If it turns out to be more than that, we're saying it would be funded from you guys. And if you were concerned that 5,000 was enough, that's where you could say, okay, well, let's add a little more on a CM allowance to cover what needs to happen. All right, 13 says no costs nor scope of work is included in GMP for water and sanitary services as specified in sections 33-1000 water utilities, 33-1416 water distribution, and 333-100 sanitary utility sewerage. Since no work is indicated on the drawings, it was clarified during our scope review with the design team that these specifications sections were included in these documents in case we needed to do anything. They would have the requirements there, but there is no scope of work on the drawings at this stage for any of this work. So there's no dollars right now included for it. 14 says, except as otherwise provided for in the bid documents, no costs nor scope of work is included in the GMP for addressing the early site enabling independent review comments by DTC as indicated in their report dated April 25th, 2025. So this is your other professional review of the bid documents. Again, they're going to do that for phase 2. They did have review comments. I'm pretty sure all of it got incorporated in the bid documents, but in case it did not, we didn't pick it up either. So it's not like I went through it with our low bidder and said, oh, do you have this, do you have that? We're assuming that Tyson Kim was able to get all those review comments into bid documents.
There weren't that many anyway.
There wasn't, there was signage. So, and then 15 says, no CM field office will be established on site for this phase of work. CM staff, we just assume, will utilize office space currently located in the town hall municipal building, just because right now the truck is gonna be in our own way, so.
You're welcome to use my.
Yeah, right next to the town's office.
Just made an assumption there.
Yeah.
And then 16 is the GMP schedule and costs are based on receiving approval of this GMP no later than June 15th.
So Laura, you don't plan on mobilizing any of the offices?
Not the phase two.
Not till phase two.
They're just gonna be in the way. We try to set something up for them, so.
So temporary service, is that, that's only for the work? There's no,
Correct.
I know most of it's grading, stripping topsoil, and setting up fence, but if they're digging there and they hit something that either was or was not marked by call before you dig, are we on the hook for that? Or is
Well-
that,
I'm pretty sure, pretty sure I bought them doing a GPR before we get started. And they're just supposed to let us know if they, yeah, so I have the site work contractor shall employ a utility locating service upon receipt of limited notice to proceed. Site work contractor shall provide a plan with the location of located utilities, including use of ground penetrating radar as required. Utility markouts shall be remarked on a monthly basis or as required by call before you dig and local authorities, whichever is more stringent. Any underground utilities found that are not on the contract drawings shall be brought to the attention of the construction manager immediately. So we're supposed to find it by ground penetrating radar and deal with it before we hit it.
and if they do, then is the contractor responsible for the repair of that? Because I'm thinking water, obviously 5 feet underground, but you are doing some stripping of topsoil, you're gonna be doing a little bit of paving down there.
Right.
So I know there's some drawings on there, so would they be responsible to fix that?
In this particular case, they would. Like, if there's something that can't be located for some reason, whether it's, it was underneath the tennis courts and we just didn't have access to it, or the GPR didn't work, there was an unknown utility service that couldn't be located, it would probably be something that we would end up paying the guy for. So, fix that. But the whole idea is for them to get out there and do their survey, do their due diligence basically, and hire a ground penetrating radar company to come out and survey the site and make those markings, so.
Michael, do you have another question or is your?
I do, yeah. Just a question, Laurel, as you were talking about, I think you identified that you've included an allowance for lighting should we need it, something like that. Is that the only area where there's an allowance? Is everything else been specified and we're not dealing with allowances in this early enabling?
Allowances on that page, one was the site security, the other one was if we were to deal with any sort of unsuitable subgrade excavation.
Just these two right here. Gotcha. Understood. Thank you. And I think I heard you say it, but I want to clarify because it was a little soft. The topsoil that we're removing next to the library parking lot, is that being stored on site or is that being taken off, or is that going to disappear in some other, how's the topsoil going to return? And is that something that is outside the scope of this, this GMP?
when you strip the topsoil for the temporary lot,
It's going off.
and then 2 years later, we take the lot back and you gotta put topsoil back.
We can make it available, it's for the town, we're putting it somewhere on behalf of the town, so if it's still available for our next phase contractor to use and put it back, then they can go grab it. There's just no room on site.
So Michael, all that, part of the, one of the additional scopes of work to the enabling plan was to haul material off-site at a location designated by the town, so the town's gonna own that topsoil.
Gotcha.
And so-
So that cost is already built into this GMP of getting it off-site, and the cost of returning it, I presume, would be at a later, in the next phase of the GMP.
Correct.
Okay, excellent, thanks.
Can I ask, so you also mentioned number 12, that's a trade contractor allowance as well, right?
It's not really an allowance, it's just that he told us that's what he included for doing that work. And at the time, we had, during our scope review, we had the design team there, we had the person, the civil engineer, and it all seemed reasonable. There was we discussed this, further clarification, replacing the overflow weir located above the swirl chamber. So we were all in agreement at the scope review meeting that that is what the intent was for this. It's an existing more technical unit that's out there. And literally, that's the note that they had.
Are there any,
bid off of.
are there any other trade contractor allowances as well?
Yes, I believe I have.
You don't typically list those in a GMP,
No,
but they do have to be authorized by owner or no?
No, not the trade allowances. Those are within the package themselves. And
that's in the actual bid documents.
But there's no risk on the expense side for the owner if the owner doesn't have control over the use of those trade allowances? So in
No,
other
it's
words,
ju-
if
it's
they've
just something-
overextended, it's out of your,
Well, I'll read them to you. There's three. So one is 10 additional concrete jersey barriers, including mobilization and demobilization costs. We had a unit price. We told them to carry 10 of those at a unit price. So we have 1 million concrete jersey barriers here in case we needed more. We got 10. What happens if we need more than that?
it would come out of our.
Okay. Next is 2 is 10 additional 2x2 temporary metal site signs.
Same thing.
We have signage, but who knows, you may need more. The third one is $7,000 lump sum for continuing to provide on-site inspections and associated reports of erosion and sedimentation control, and for providing additional erosion and sedimentation control from the completion of phase 1 on-site work. In other words, that guy's gone in August until October 31, 2022. Contractors shall note that this allowance is not to be utilized for doing any sort of stabilization of if we were doing topsoil stockpiles or anything. So this is once our phase 1 contractor's gone, we're waiting for our phase 2 guy to show up. We may need somebody coming around with storm events, we need hay bales, we need silt fence, we need to fix things.
regardless.
So we have to, so they sort of, right, we can't just walk away and leave it there.
Right, we can't just disturb the site and just not have anybody around to help take care of things. In case you have a major 50-year, 100-year rainstorm, we need to have somebody to be able to respond to that.
That's an allowance because if there's only one storm or it depends on how much they have to activate or do.
And so again, if this gets exceeded,
That would typically come out of our CMP. It goes back to the owner.
so it's
It's not
more,
spent.
so it's more like any of these trade allowances are in and out of the CM contingency. The CM allowances that are in the GMP are in and out of the owner's contingency.
Right, so there's 59,000 that's in that same contingency. If they don't spend that,
It goes back.
It will provide a tracking law.
It rolls in on the trade allowance.
it makes
The overall.
I know this is 3, but I know we're gonna have.
But throughout the big portion.
Yes,
of the project,
there's gonna be
it'll be
many.
part of our CM report, and there's gonna be a trade contractor allowance log. With everything that's been expended to each of those line items.
And we've asked O&G to produce a draft of all the bid packages for phase 2, as well as any allowances that they're anticipating including in those bid packages. So long before we go out to bid, we'll have reviewed and agreed with and made available to you guys to know what we're doing.
I appreciate the question asked about the trade allowances that are in there that aren't maybe as easily deciphered from this. Can we make an effort with the second GMP? It may not be entirely possible, but I'd like every effort to be made that we have specs for everything and that we're not necessarily dealing with allowances. And if we are, could we know about that sooner or later in our designing right now to figure out if there are elements of the current bid documents where an allowance is being left?
I'm not understanding the question. I know I
Okay,
need,
I'll make it less of a question. Can we be certain that we don't have allowances in the next GMP contract? So in other words, when we're doing the bid documents, everything is specified and we're not saying we'd like an appliance allowance of X, but that we have specific documents so that we make, that every effort is made to eliminate the use of allowances in the next GMP that's basically the construction of the school.
I can answer for the design team. We cannot put allowances in our specification. The state won't allow it. And that's a play on words, but they won't allow allowances. So we can't put it in the specs. Whether or not the CM puts allowances in their buyout package with the trades, that's a decision they need to make. But I think you're asking a fair question. Can the CM tabulate the allowances that you're carrying or imposing on the trade contractors so that the owner knows?
And that's what I was trying to, that was what I was trying to refer to a minute ago.
Yes.
We've already spoken with them on this.
Okay.
They will be tabulating what they would like to see for allowances, and we will be discussing it, and we will all get a chance to chime in and approve it before it is part of the actual bid document.
So does that answer your question, Mike?
It does. I'm not clear on the mechanics of how, when we have specific bid documents that, as you said, Richard, the state does not allow for the carrying of allowances. I'm not certain of the mechanics of how the CM then turns around and says, carry an allowance for something. I'm not certain that I follow how that's.
Michael, the state will actually allow, right now, and again, they change the rules all the time, but right now they allow 2 allowances per trade contractor package. So they're allowed 2 per package, and then they allow us 6 GMP allowances. That's what they claim, right?
I think the difference here is Richard is referencing his specifications and O&G is talking specifically about their bid packages.
Right.
Those are 2 different documents. So the allowances will not show up in technical specifications. They will show up in the bid packages.
How does that help us as a purveyor of these things? Or why isn't there a specific amount? Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm making an assumption that when an allowance is placed on something, there's a risk that we potentially carry, that when somebody comes back and says, well, the allowance that the subcontractor is carrying is X, and what you want is X plus something.
So,
And
Mike,
so you're going to need to fund more of that that's outside the allowance.
Michael, a good example of a CM, a trade allowance that we typically put into our school projects is for fire. We pretty much always,
What?
fire protection, your sprinkler system.
Okay.
A lot of fire marshal walks through the project, getting towards turnover. They may want to add a head here and there. It typically happens. So we typically have an allowance for, let's say, 10 sprinkler heads with 10 feet of pipe or whatever the terminology is. It'll be sprinkler heads to be added upon walkthrough of the fire marshal. And what that does, the reason we have it as an allowance is it doesn't become a change order. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the state has a cap on change orders, 5% of the project. So by having it as a trade allowance in the bid documents, it's not going against the change order tabulation. So there's typical things that we run into on jobs that you can't necessarily quantify on the bid documents, on the drawings, but they're things that we typically know we need. Another, for instance, on an existing building, let's say we're renovating the 900 wing. Well, somebody may assume that the walls go up to deck right now, right? Or they may, usually it's a mess above ceiling in existing buildings. So sometimes we'll carry an allowance of, I don't know, linear footage or lump sum to seal, fire caulk, existing penetrations and existing walls. Again, we know we're gonna run into it, but we can't necessarily quantify it before the bid because you can't look at every inch. You know you're gonna need it. So it's in there, and it just is protecting against a huge amount of change orders. So there's very.
My understanding then, as you're sharing this, I just want to figure out if I'm getting this right. So in Richard's documents, in the bid documents, it might indicate all of the amount of fire protection equipment, all the sprinkler heads and all those things. Are you saying that in addition to that specificity, you will carry an allowance, not in substitution of that. Is that correct?
Correct. It's an add to
All right,
Richard's.
you've helped me immensely. My worry was in taking that there was an area where we could provide specificity, but instead we're giving an allowance, which is squishy. And what you're saying is you're taking all the bid documents, and if anything, the allowance is landing in spaces that would be in excess of the bid documents. Is that right?
Correct. And then that will be included in the GMP, guaranteed maximum price.
Gotcha. Understood. I appreciate that. I was worried that it was in substitution, not in addition. Thank you.
Just one other clarification, this Nelson Reese project manager. The allowances are also for management of the job, so as far as guardrails, if we have to add guardrails for OSHA requirements, an opening is opened up, those can't be identified. We have to have an allowance typically in the general trades package where there's a specific amount of linear footage for safety rails. There's also temporary protection to protect the building from the elements that aren't readily identified in the documents, because TSKP, they're not going to put temporary guardrails and so forth. So the management of the job, I wouldn't be able to manage the job if I had to come to a building committee and ask for an additional 5 feet of safety rails. So it's, to Laurel's point, it's additional heads for authority having jurisdiction, but also in management of the job, additional site signage and so forth. They're basically for items that you can't easily identify in the documents for the management of the job. Hopefully that clarifies that portion of it.
And I would just add in, the unit prices are gathered at bid time, so they're competitively bid. So they're also not subject to
Correct. Yeah.
an open debate with a contractor later on. It helps quantify and define what those unit prices are when they're competitively bid.
And I provide a full accounting on a monthly basis of those trade allowances, and the trade contractors aren't allowed to bill for overhead and profit. It's very specific as far, they're not allowed to expend any monies. It's only at the direction of the construction manager, which is our team.
So the phase 2 GMP is going to be just like this, only bigger.
I love it.
Bigger number too.
So if there's no additional questions on the GMP, I would suggest that we just go through the Gerber letter, because that's the motion on the table. And then we'll talk about the budget impact.
So this is something.
Can I just have one list? Everybody's got on four and five. That was really kind of, I think, where the question applied for us. Just want to make sure.
So I did this for phase 1. This is to get approval to award a contract to a particular contractor. If you were approving this GMP tonight, I wouldn't necessarily need that because this kind of is the authority. So, I mean, this is just if somebody wants to sign it, we'll go with issuing a contract. So when it comes to phase 2, again, I keep relating everything to phase 2. When it comes to phase 2, there's going to be some critical contracts that we're going to want to award right away. We're not going to have time to wait for the GMP. The GMP is going to be a very large document. I can come to you with the cost summary sheet of where I think the costs are based on the bid results, but I'm going to have these types of letters probably for 6 trade packages. It'll be our HVAC, plumbing, electrician, concrete, site, steel. Like that's basically, I'm going to be coming to you with those letters asking you to give me approval to award the contracts while we're finalizing the GMP for phase 2. So you won't get this letter for every single trade contract. It's a step to kind of bypass this contractual document, but it gives us the authority to give him the notice of award.
And so the building committee could technically just approve the GMP and you wouldn't need the award letter because
Yeah, because if this is approved,
right?
as long as you have the authority to approve it, you have the authority to approve it?
And according to this requires signature, it's not us.
We kind of really do the
And
Right,
then
that's-
it goes on for.
Then they
final
just release,
sign off.
they just release, there wouldn't need to be a letter.
You
at
don't
that
need a
point.
letter.
The idea for this was that this group might need more time to get to the GMP, so that could we release Gerber while we were going through this, but since we elected to put them both on the agenda, you could actually, or you could or could not, that's totally up to you, but the idea is if the GMP is then released to them, they're gonna release their subcontractors.
But I'm gonna need this step in phase 2, because I need to get these guys moving while we're still, but we will have a cost summary of where we are. I'll have some high level cost summary based on the results, where we think we are. I may not have my CM allowances nailed down at that time, but
Well, Laurel put the town manager on there just as a, because that's who signed. the
that's who
contract.
signed our contract, yeah.
So, could be wrong, so we would need to 6 letters if that in fact needs to be.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to make sure we're not overstepping our bounds here from a contract.
No,
Laurel, is this like a limited notice to proceed? Is that what you're identifying?
This is more of a, it's not really a recommendation, we're just letting you know who the qualified responsible bidder is, and that if you agree with us that that's the lowest responsible bidder based on the bid results, because they're usually attached to this
Yeah,
letter.
no, I'm sorry. As you were describing that we might need to move more rapidly on elements of the different divisions. Are you indicating that you might bring forward to us in the future, like a limited notice to proceed? What would you call those documents? Like a letter of intent? What are they?
We call them scope award letters, and it looks
Okay.
just like that, and it's gonna be for these other 6 trade packages. It's gonna be who we say is the lowest responsible qualified bidder and what their contract amount would be. And again, for phase 2, it's gonna get a little complicated because alternates are gonna come in. So I don't know when you're gonna pick the alternates, but if you want to award alternates with the letter, it'll be in there. It'll say for contract amount of such and such, including alternates such. So the idea is so that you're familiar with this letter for phase 2. This is a way for us to then issue the limit notice to proceed to the contractor that tells them go. That's our contractual start date with them. Everything in our documents is based off of the letter that Gerber. So if you guys approve it tonight, tomorrow they get their letter. Everything in our documents is based off of tomorrow's date.
But
And
what I hear you saying is that we will need to act on those in the future before we sign off on the full GMP. Is that correct?
phase 2, that is true, yes.
And I'm sorry, Meg, I heard you asking this question, but it was hard to hear. Are you saying that you feel as though that's something that in the future we have the ability to raise motions and pass them on these?
I don't really see why, I
different
think,
scopes?
I just had a side conversation, but I believe that's gonna fall within our purview.
Okay, good.
At the point that we're approving these 6 or 7 separate packages to get them ready, and I understand that process. We won't have the GMP, so how comfortable will we be with the overall price?
That's what I'm gonna do. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you'll have a full breakdown of all the bid results.
Yeah.
And our analysis of who we think the low bidder is gonna be.
Right.
And a total of the trade values versus our overall budget. So if we're $1 million over, and I'm just throwing that number out there, we may not come to you with all those packages. We may have scoped 2 of those guys and say, yeah, these guys are low numbers. We're not gonna get any better numbers than this. Let's award these 2 to get us started out there, like the concrete and steel, right? We might get them started first. But you'll have a very,
Yeah, from a high level,
yeah,
you know, obviously that's been my concern. I said it more than once that, you know, in a few months we come back and, you know, this project is, you know, within the numbers that we've been talking about, not something egregiously over. So
right.
that would be my only concern.
Right. And what I will do is, you didn't see it here because this is just one trade package, but you're gonna get a listing per trade package of all the bids, but then I'm gonna have what's called a trade contract summary sheet, which is just the apparent low bidders. And you will notice, because it always happens, I may not carry the low bid. You'll have all the bid results, and I may skip to the second bidder because I didn't vet them yet or whatever, but for that night that I'm looking for these letters, I will put in if I think I'm gonna carry the second number for now, just to give you an overall idea, because I hadn't.
So
vetted
you'll be
everybody yet.
conservative
We will.
on
Yes.
your pre,
Right.
preliminary picks.
Yes.
Exactly, especially if somebody we're not familiar with,
Mhm.
or if somebody's screaming low. You know, sometimes somebody's screaming low and they turn out to be okay. There's reasons why people have a lower number than others. These were very, very tight bids, but a lot of times we do get a low baller and.
And then they
As long as they
come
have the
back
scope
and they say
covered.
they missed something and they don't want it anymore.
In
No.
some cases. but-
We vet them pretty thoroughly at the scope review, and if somebody's really low, you know, we just make sure they have the entire job covered.
They also know they were really low, so they may try to cause some problems at that time, so that's another reason why they made this the second bidder.
Understand. Yeah, our job here is to protect that budget. Right, so ultimately, when we go through all these bids and the bid openings, if we do find one package that seems to be way out of whack with our budgets, you know, and sit down with them, scope them and realize that they're carrying something incorrectly. Or if there's some glaring, you know, mistake that everybody missed that wasn't picked up in the design documents, we may opt to rebid that one package, make those corrections and rebid that one package.
In which case we'd be coming to you saying, you know, you should reject the bid. You take a motion, reject all bids, and then we go out and rebid it. You guys have authority in that.
But having 21 bid packages is nice because you can kind of choose and, you know, pick and choose what, if you do have an issue, you can pull out one package, rebid it, but again, at the same time, award the rest of them and keep the project moving, so.
Any questions for Laura, at least on that run through, at least what we've heard to date? We're gonna kind of dig into some of the more of the details, like give a good overview. And I feel kind of good about the fact we have a smaller version that we're reviewing. Our practice version that we're reviewing before the big one comes to us. So anything else for Laura right now? Or Mark?
My only question, it would seem that during that time we should be meeting more. I mean, do you change our schedule to accommodate, you know, reaction, you know, from us at, you know, that's prompt, given the timeline? I
I
just
actually
wonder.
have you guys on the schedule to approve the phase 2 critical contract, so kind of is here. I have you approving the critical phase 2 contracts, 9/28, which I think is a regular meeting. When the bids are due, I have bidding basically due then. I am gonna need you to figure out which alternates you're gonna want to accept based on the bid results, because it may transfer who our actual low bidder is. So there is some nuances there once the bids are starting to come in, but it's really only a 2 or 3 week time period. You know, and then I do need to do the GMP and then you need to meet again. So other than a special meeting fitting in, I'm not really seeing much, maybe 1 or 2.
So that's all happening in September,
Yeah,
late
September,
August,
yes.
late August to
Yes.
September.
mid-September, whenever it's back. on Vacation.
So what's that 2-week time period that you're talking about? Laura?
It's about the end of September. I've got bids coming in. End of September, so it's anywhere from end of September to end of October. You know, I'll try to hit all your regular meetings and stuff, but I may get a special meeting.
It's helpful. I mean, we're always trying to plan it.
Yeah,
Right, and so, yeah, I would say like in the middle of September instead of the end, we may want to meet just to talk about alternates, maybe reintroduce everybody to the alternates again, based on how the bids are gonna come in, because we won't have received the bids yet. Where do we think we want to be? You know, just refresh everybody's memory, so it's not, you're not doing it in a rush.
and that's where we're looking at and seeing what they are, like validating what they are. We won't have a cost, like you're saying.
I would say
Maybe making a priority list of what.
But we
you know,
could be
what's our first-
looking at priority based on need and desire.
Right, because I think there's 8 now. I think there's 8. So,
There's 8.
so it would be good to kind of flush through everybody's different opinions as far as what should be important. And at least you've gone through that initial exercise before the bids come in, and then I need you to make a decision.
And then applying the cost to that could shift the priorities based on.
Yeah, it'll, depending on how they did the alternates, may divvy up for low bidders.
But as you said, it may change the priority of the alternates too.
Right.
One is,
You just don't want to wait until the bids come in to have that discussion. We should have that discussion at.
I agree, and I think different stakeholders are gonna have different viewpoints on what the
Exactly.
alternatives are
You
as
don't wanna
far
push
as what the
that.
priority might look like, even without the cost associated, I would
Yes.
think.
Yeah. Station beginning of September.
Okay. All right, any other questions on at least that overview of where we sit? Again, we've got some more discussion to be had here,
Great. And if you will, scroll down to the next sheet. So unfortunately, the highlights on this are very faint, but as Devin's gonna be my guide here and kind of run through the highlighted areas. Everybody's seen this design development cost estimate before. We approved this cost estimate budget, and we'll call it a budget summary. So last month, we came to the building committee asking them to approve the release of the bid package or go out to bid based on about $1 million GMP package, right? So tonight we're here talking about closer to a $2 million GMP package, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the differences and where those dollars came into play and how we've addressed them in the budget. And so first I wanted to talk a little through the budget line items, so that'll help to tell a little bit of the story of where we landed today and why we're here with a different GMP than the original cost estimates presented. So-
Can I just have you 1 second?
You
Sorry.
may.
I just want to make sure from a building perspective, because there's been a pretty big gap in time. Remember when we had the conversation and it was very specific, I said to Laurel, say it again, Laurel, this does not commit us to dollars. Do you remember that conversation? We were looking at early enabling, looking at the estimate. So that was our point in time, that's what we knew as a point of reference for cost based on early enabling. We said, yep, move forward, please, get us more information so that we can then take a look and make a decision on the cost and what's included in scope there. And just make sure also everybody's clear on what the benefit of this work is, if we remember. So, and tell me to be quiet, but I think it's important to level set here, just because we had some transition of time, that our purpose here was to try to get as much work done during that summer time period when the kids were not in school, and kind of ease ease them back in with the traffic patterns already complete and that construction site already set up in preparation for our October start. And there's some timeline benefit as well to that. So I just want to put that on the table, make sure we're all starting in the same point. Does that sound familiar? Make sense to everybody? Everybody online, okay?
Megan, you can add to that, because of the time of year that we're actually going out to bid.
Yep.
There's a schedule benefit from getting that done, because we would be going out in November to do work that we needed to do in July and August and September. So it wouldn't be getting done till the following spring. So part of that schedule work that we did to get ties to a little bit more time to get their documents ready for the state. So that benefit is also this early package, because it's still happening on schedule. So that pre-work is still happening when the schedule warranted. So that's another benefit from this.
And I think it would be important to add, as a reminder, that this is not additional work. This is work that would be done through the construction phase 2, but we've added this phase 1 is taking a shift of work from phase 2 and moving it earlier into this enabling package. And we'll kind of talk through some of that. So going through, you can see this construction budget, this is one line item in our master budget, right? We have, everybody's seen that slide with the design fees, the construction fees, the professional fees, the FF&E and data, and then our owner's contingency. This is just the construction. Every one of those items that lines up in this budget just makes up that $115,600,000 number in that construction. This is everything that makes up the construction. So, because we're going to talk a little bit about contingencies in here, and they are included in that construction cost. They're not part of the owner's contingency. They're not additional dollars. Our focus on ONG's goal is to have to keep our work within that construction budget. And so the phase one enabling package, so that line A, if you can just highlight that line A for me, right there, and then slide over to the number, right, is now, that's $1.8 million. That's the number we saw in Gerber's numbers, 1,815, plus the two allowances. That's where you get that 1,833 number, right? And then, so the phase one, that's the phase one, thank you, that's the phase one enabling package today. That's what we're talking about today in terms of releasing. And so we recognize that the number had grown considerably, about $1 million from the first time we had moved through. And so where did we end up? If you could go down to letter I, it's identified as scope from phase two site to phase one enabling package. There's about $600,000 worth of work, actual work, that was shifted from phase two, just like all of the other work we talked about, shifted from phase two to the phase one drawings, but not cost estimated a second time before the bid packages went out. So that scope was slid over. They were dollars that were cost estimated and accounted for with ONG within the budget. However, they were not shifted to the enabling package prior to coming to the building committee to say, this is what we're looking at. So the scope of work in that bid package and what went out on the street and what was bid by those 9 subcontractors, that's the right package. That's the right scope of work. That's the scope of work that was approved by the state. And we've got some really good numbers. We had some really good feedback, and those are the numbers that we're working on. So we recognize that 600,000 should have been moved from the phase two bucket up to phase one, and it didn't happen. So to do that, we added, ONG added a deduct line item in there to just take that 600,000 out of the site work. And it's added up above in the enablement, right? So I've still got another $400,000 to go. How do we make up that $400,000? If you recall, before I get to that $70,000 number, would you mind going all the way down to the bottom? There is a variance over underline item, the very, very bottom of the page there, Devin. That variance over under, when we approved this design development budget, had a number on the very far right where you see 0 now of $361,000. That $361,000 was the number that we presented to say, after all of the VE work that we put together, we were $361,000 better to budget. So we were below budget at the end of design development, and that was this $361,000 sort of cushion in that budget. And we talked about, if you remember, a few meetings before that, we were off by about $12,000, and we were talking about how to make up that 12 grand. We went back, and Richard and his team had finished the exterior window VE item, and that was a large dollar that we were able to add last minute to that VE item, and the budgets came in now below budget. So you had done over value engineered enough to create a float in your budget. So when you apply that 361 back to this, you're short by about $8,000 or $9,000. We went to design contingency. Can you go up to the design contingency line? So that number right there was at 4% in our last design development. It's now 3.94%. So we took 0.06% of that design contingency of 1%, right? Which equated to, between all three of those, it levels out to about $8,000 or $9,000. And what that is that design, construction, and cost estimating contingency is that 4% buffer. It started at 7.5%. We went through the 2 phases, two waves of the design estimating so far, and we've since reduced it from 7.5 to 4. In this process, we reduced it from 4 to 3.94%. So those dollars, that $3.7 million that you see there today, by the time we're done with our next cost estimate, those dollars will be rolled up into the construction dollars. There's escalation there and CM contingency as well, but we tapped into that for about $8,000 to make up the difference and to $0, you know, to balance the budget at 115.6. So if you just go to the next slide, I kind of took out all the stuff in the middle and just kind of spelled it out. Our phase one early enabling had a delta of about $1 million. So that's $1 million difference from the first time we kind of came to you, said, we think it's going to be around $1 million. Can we go out to bid? To knowing that we've got $1 million spread based on the bids that came in and what we had budgeted for. The scope that should have been slid from phase two to phase one was worth $600,000. And the budget variance over under was at 361. So we also went back to Gerber, said, hey, our numbers are more than we anticipated. Are there any credit items that we can think of, scope items that maybe not required, that we could look at and get a credit for? There's a line of temporary fence, a double line of temporary fence in the back, and we can bring up the site plan if it's needed. They came back and said we would give you a credit for $70,000. Add that to the equation, and you're short about $8,000 difference, which is what we went to design contingency for. You could choose to keep that budget variance in there and take everything out of design contingency. Either way, it's just a different bucket that you're pulling from to balance within the construction budget to balance. So with 600,000 of known scope that came from 2 to 1 and was already estimated, you've got to come up with that $400,000 difference. And so within that $400,000 difference, there were items like additional temp fence, there was some additional drainage, things, scope items that would have been captured in the construction, in the cost estimate we're about to complete. That scope work, you have to keep in mind that as we went from schematics to design development to construction documents, that the plans are always evolving. Richard and his team aren't waiting. They're continuing to evolve the drawings. Things continue to be added and finalized and identified. Some of those items made it to the enabling plan, but had yet not been in the full construction set plan. And so those things would have been identified. So it's not added scope, it's just scope. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
You're doing great.
Those items would have been captured in that cost estimate then. We would have had the same conversation about those same items only a couple of weeks from now. But because they were slid into the enabling, because it made sense to do them in the enabling plan, those dollars weren't captured in a timely manner. And so that's kind of where we are today in terms of, here's the challenge we have. Here's the formula that we put together within the budget so that the budget is still balanced. We're not over budget. And a conversation that we would have been having probably a few weeks ago, a few weeks from now, we're having now because it's been incorporated into that enabling package. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about timing and where we were at, but I think that's how we got to where we are.
Next question. Michael, go ahead.
Not a question. I just wanted to share, Mark, I appreciate your explanation. I think it's very well reasoned. I have, as somebody who followed these numbers through a previous committee meeting, I think you've done an excellent job of explaining how the delta on this early enabling package is addressed. And when it comes down to it, in a sense, our design contingency on some level, although we didn't take that 361,000 and add it to our design contingency, we had that as a cushion. And what you're indicating is that that plus the 70 grand plus only 8,000 taken out of design contingency. I think this is an exceptional way of explaining this and documenting, and I appreciate your work.
Anything else, Mark, you want to add, or are we good?
No, I think Mark kind of touched on, all the issues here, and, one thing you have to realize is that, again, as Mark mentioned, that these drawings are evolving. So as our estimators are working, our site estimators are working on the construction set right now, construction documents, this overage, that $361,000 delta there would have been picked up in that next estimate, right? And as we produce this last CD estimate for the committee's review and approval, that design contingency would also be adjusted, right? So we would be adjusting that number down, again, to balance and level the budget. So it's just that we are doing this in advance of the final CD estimate that we're working on.
It's called a design contingency. You can almost think of it as an estimated contingency, right? The drawings are only so far complete, so we're able to, OMG is able to do an estimate within a certain range of accuracy, and then put a contingency on that. And then when the drawings get more complete, the percentage can come down, because there's more documents to review, there's less assumptions being made. So at each stage, the design contingency comes down, and the takeoffs get more detailed, because there's more in the drawings. Things that were square foot takeoffs are now nuts and bolts takeoff, because there's a full set of structural drawings, and they're not looking at an architectural drawing to estimate how many tons of steel. Now they have a structural drawing. So that's the normal process on any construction project. It's a design contingency, but it's not Richard's contingency, but it's the project's contingency to bring accuracy to the budget. And the better the drawings get, the more complete they get, the less there is a need for them.
And it's not necessarily a one-for-one comparison, but think of it as kind of drawing a line, right? Your detailed estimate is above the line, your design contingency is below the line. As the drawings are further developed and OMG's estimating team has more information, they further develop above the line and they take the contingency and roll it up there to account for that. So it's not that this is just the design contingency isn't just a fictitious number. It in a way gets rolled up into the detail. So as the detail gets developed, the design contingency gets smaller, but it really gets rolled up into the detail.
And the exact same thing happens with the escalation.
Correct.
So as we get closer, we're carrying escalation now, we have so many months, and that also gets rolled up. So the numbers down below under the contingency are less, but in theory, the construction costs above increase because you're closer, and the numbers that we're doing on as of that date, we've already accounted for escalation. We're closer to bid, so the amount we need to project usually comes down. So those two contingencies, design estimate contingency and escalation, are both going to be coming down, but your contractor costs above the trade costs will be going up.
I know, Jenny, you have a question or thought you want to add. I guess, and I get that, I understand about what we're doing, and the more information we know. I think where I struggle a little bit about it though is that we're doing this after the bid went out, right? Usually all that's done, the roll up and detail, like we know all that detail work before the bid went out.
Right, like when we presented the original budget estimate, right, we had a single drawing. It was, people call it a cartoon because it was just kind of a pretty picture. We said, this is the work that we wanted to incorporate in the enabling phase, right? We showed a small temporary parking lot. We had, I don't even know, we didn't have temporary lighting on that package. We had a construction fence. It was roughly $800,000 worth of work, on that little sketch. From that point, going forward, TSKP was hired to put together a full set of bid documents, and just a lot more information was added to that. We decided that the berm in the back of the property was going to be constructed with landscaping, right? That wasn't part of our original plan. So there was a number of items like that that were added to the set of documents, it's all work that has to be completed, right? It was all work that had to be completed as part of phase 2, but again, like we said, we're going to be sliding that forward. Where we fell down as your construction manager is that we should have stepped up and said, guys, just remember, the committee approved $800,000 in construction. We're looking at, 1.6 or 1.8 million based on the set of documents. And that's where we should have just said, just to let everybody know, this number is creeping. And I wouldn't call it scope creep. It's just that we moved more work from that phase 2 into the stage 1. So, and I do apologize to the committee, because we should have, you know, stepped up and mentioned that to everybody, so that we wouldn't have had had to go through this serious exercise.
It would have got us closer to this one.
Yes. Yes.
John, you-
I mean, I get the explanation of the scope of work. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. The designs are more, but they're still at 360 and, you know, I'm just looking at this more from a, you know, it's 360 over the 1.6 something million that was changed in the scope of work. So it's still a chunk of change. It's, you know, we're eating into 10% of the design contingency on 2% of the work. And that's the way I'm looking at it. So again, it always falls back to, you know, my biggest struggle is saying, let's move forward with this. But if that happens on the bigger package, put it plainly, we're screwed. For lack of, I'm not great at English, so they're my strong stuff. So I'm just, that explanation is a lot better than what we went through in the working group. It all kind of came in. Obviously, I've had time to think about it since then, so that just kind of buttons everything up. At the working group meeting before we left, I had asked if you guys had other contacts in the industry just to see if there, you know, we had asked if there's any other bids that you guys have been working on either within yourselves or your company, and if there was any red flags anywhere. And, you know, there was nothing of this size and scope that you guys were personally handling, but maybe you had a chance to reach out or at least get some anecdotal, you know, make Johnny Carrier feel a little bit better, kind of evidence that we're not headed for, you know, a $5-10 million overage. I know that we can continue to VE, but we can only do that so far before we get into programmatic stuff. And obviously we want to, it's more of we're going to get there anyways, but we'll have spent $2 million before we get there. And that's kind of where my struggle is. And I get it, there's pros and cons to this. Like, and you know, for some of those in the committee that weren't at the working group meeting or privy to it, it's, you know, if we don't do this or if we don't accept it, what Laurel said, by either today or by next week, you know, we don't start in the summer, we're basically not completing the job at the scheduled time, which is that fall of 24. It doesn't mean that that's guaranteed fall of 24, because there's always something that can happen, you know, pandemic, things like that, but this would basically secure that we're not doing it. So I'm not gonna go as far as to say it's a gamble, but I think that's why we have you guys here, is to make us feel more comfortable that, you know, this is just, I'm gonna minimize this, but $2 million is minimal in the scope of everything. And if you guys said that, you know, it's more just our eye was on the bigger thing, and this is just something that we thought was pretty straightforward and we pushed it through, and there's a mistake of 300,000, I can take that, and knowing that you guys are gonna comfort us by saying, you know, that should not happen. I know you can't guarantee it, my lawyer never does, but you can at least make us feel better that it isn't gonna be this large of a discrepancy percentage-wise when we get there. And I know that's a big ask, but it is, you know, our end of that, you know, if this goes wrong, I got a lot of neighbors that are gonna be real pissed off if you're knocking on my door. So, and the rest of us as well. So I guess, I know that's more of a comment than a question, but at the end, the question is, have you done any reach out? Is there anything that you guys can point to that, you know, we're not gonna be sitting here, you know, on fire in a few months?
Well, just a couple real quick things. Again, that 361 is work that is indicated on the set of documents that our estimators had not seen as of yet, right? Because they didn't have that set of documents, per se, right? They didn't do a full estimate on that set of drawings. That $361,000 would have been reflected in the set of documents that they're reviewing now, right? It's a more complete set. It's a CD set that they're reviewing and pricing right now. So that technically, that 361, you would not have seen that, right? We would have presented that CD estimate to you. That 361 would have been already absorbed in that construction design estimate contingency, right? We would have reduced that number, and nobody would have known that site number had gone up slightly, right? So it's just work that just wasn't reflected on the drawings at that point in time when we did that initial estimate. To your other question, we are doing a few different things in this particular, in this CD estimate. So we are bringing in a number of different trade contractors just to get some more insight in the current market. We're bidding work all the time, putting together estimates all the time. And our guys do typically reach out to the masons, to the window guys, to the mechanical, electrical contractors, and seeing where, you know, some certain price trends are running. And those numbers are being factored into this estimate. Actually, Mike had requested that we actually have sit-down meetings with some of the contractors that we typically do business with to get that more detailed insight. And our teams are going to be doing that. The other thing that we're doing a little bit different is PMC again, TSKP's estimator is going to be doing a side-by-side estimate. So we're going to be doing a full reconciliation of this construction estimate. So both estimators will come into the room with their numbers and they go line by line and find out why, you know, our number was lower or higher than their estimators' numbers, and they reconcile. So that's something that we hadn't seen since what, the ED, I'm sorry, the SD, or
enhanced command.
okay. So that's kind of another level of checking. And again, I think, well, we're going to be bidding a fairly large project just prior to your job, it's going to be Torrington High School. So we're going to have some really up-to-date numbers that we can use as well to adjust. You know, if we see a real crazy spike again in roofing costs, for instance, right? We've been seeing numbers like that creeping. We'll at least have the ability to come back and say, we finished our CD estimate, you know, 2 months ago, but we're seeing a major spike in that roofing number. And we may want to revisit, you know, reanalyze that estimate and make some adjustments in that, and come, you know, maybe come back to you and say, we maybe want to include a couple of deduct alternates in the bid documents to give us the ability to accept those alternates to reduce the cost at bid. So there's a couple of different strategies that we're looking at.
Yeah, no, but we would have already okayed this, and the money would be spent before we even get to there, so.
For this fact, you're correct, yeah.
You know, and I, you know, asking a lot of questions, and, you know, Russ and I were chatting a little bit. You guys had sent in a little bit more detail, and there were some discrepancies in there. I took a quick look. I won't tell you I didn't study it, but there were some discrepancies on, you know, some of the line items are the same thing with different prices, and you guys are pretty comfortable with that document that you sent to Russ?
Yeah. And again, you know, we had talked about that earlier. You know, we could bring our site estimator in and sit down, you know, with whomever on the committee or Russ or yourself, Johnny, and go through line by line. I mean, all he does is site estimates. That's what his job is. We have actually 2-3 full-time guys in our estimating department that just do site work. They do analyze things a little bit differently. I mean, they do bid or estimate jobs that we're actually bidding hard bid work. So we're the general contractor, and they're you know, providing us a site estimate. So they may look at the job a little bit different. You know, they're trying to get into the bidder's head so that, you know, there might be a 100-foot length of pipe shown on the drawings, but they'll look at the drawings and say, well, listen, there's a catch basin only 30 feet away. You know, it's easier for me and quicker for me to dig from point A to point B and replace the entire line. So he might have included larger quantities in certain items. And again, they're trying to really reflect what we would expect on bid day from the trades. So they are looking at, you know, the market conditions, just the current you know, work, you know, the amount of work that's in the state of Connecticut. You know, are these site contractors busy right now, right? So they may adjust their unit prices based on just, you know, labor availability and material availability. So
I guess just to clarify too, if I can, your O&G cost estimate really doesn't matter or in comparison to what Gerber's numbers
correct.
are, correct?
Right, because Gerber's number compares to the other 8 bidders, which is
So basically,
what the scope of work that was on the bid documents, that's what it's gonna cost.
Yeah, ultimately, that's the bottom line, right? No matter what the estimators do, you know, prior to bid day, those numbers are, let's say, fictitious, but they're our best guess at that point, right? The real number, right, based on market conditions and everything I kind of mentioned, is based on your bid results. So those are really the numbers that you want to focus on is what happened on bid day, because that's ultimately what is going to determine your cost of your project.
I do think those discussions with our engineering staff would go a long way, just because they did review the bid documents, they took a look at the quantities. They want questions answered, because like you just explained with, you know, the utilities,
Yeah.
they got a different number. So I think an explanation and an understanding, just so it's like, they're just double checking.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that would go a really long way, and make them feel, and I think by extension, the committee feel more comfortable.
You know, just from my own experience, I realize that everything foundation down is always more difficult. There's always more question marks. You run into things because it's on the ground. Foundation up's always a lot easier because it's on paper and you're starting from scratch. But you guys are a heavy site work contractor as well, obviously, and you got a lot of experience in there. So I was expecting some difference, but it came out obviously more, so a little bit more shock. But it'd be fair to say that this is pretty much all site work at this point. I mean, there's some fencing, a little bit of plantings, but it's all site work, so it would lend itself to a larger disparity than it would. That kind of stuff, other than market fluctuations on purchase pricing. So that's fair to say.
Any other questions, thoughts, anybody online?
Oh, I'm good.
Yeah, I think at this point, and I know I was sitting here like, could we vote on this today or can we wait a week? I'm not sure what a week more is gonna do, other than meeting with Russ and making him feel better about the numbers, because he's the one that really dove into this.
Yeah.
He's the one that has a lot of experience on this end. I gotta say, I think I'm walking that back a little bit, at least my thought process. I don't think they're gonna change, and I do think that, if you guys sit here, you're all staring us in the eye saying that, we more than likely will be okay after this next few months come by, that I would be okay, moving forward.
We have no risk though, if we extend it to next week and insert the other
Correct.
conversation. Correct, based from a timeline perspective.
Correct.
No, but
Because the 15 remains on the calendar and our job is to have everything in front of us, those evaluations complete, so that we can, feel 100% comfortable from all stakeholders' perspectives that.
right, the only difference is that those bid numbers on Laurel sheet aren't gonna change. That is the.
Correct,
you know,
yeah,
Those are the
understood.
results of bid day, those
That's
are,
what I was
you're gonna be awarded to one of those contractors, regardless of whether
Yeah,
our
it is
estimator
what
made
it
a
is,
mistake
yeah.
on the estimate or not. The only thing I guess we could look at is if there's any VE that we could, ask the contractor to provide us, and I think we did that already with the.
Yeah, we went out
temporary
there,
fence.
3 or 4 items, we requested pricing for the fence, there was a couple other items, I can't recall what they were, but the value was,
Yeah.
I think the working.
But they
group,
were
the value
verbal
was-
in nature, right? Because they won't give you anything in writing.
Well, they gave us an email. He gave us
They
an
gave us
email.
an email. So one of them, we took one of them, which is the
Yeah, because that's, I think that was more realistic. I think some of the other numbers, we don't think we were getting, fair shake, dollar for dollar that. Understood.
There were no unit prices within those bid documents that we could refer to if we were looking to be anything, like if we had, say, less fill would be acceptable for the town in a certain area or something like that.
No,
So
there are unit
prices
prices on
under
the form proposal, but you'd be hard pressed to be able to use them to reduce the base bid.
Right.
But the town has all the bid documents. Joseph Specky, he has the bids just like I do. They're electronic and on the form proposal is what we ask for unit prices for. So there could be temporary fence. Let me see what else I asked for unit price for. Remove unsuitables, concrete jersey barrier, any sort of rock excavation, temporary silt fence, fine grade and seed, the temporary metal signs, so they're not like trying to take out scope work. But yeah, you'll have everybody's unit prices, because that's what's on the bid proposal form. But it's just one lump sum. When we bid the bid documents, we're looking for one lump sum from each trade contractor to include the entire scope of work. It's not just what they see counting pieces and parts on the drawing. it's everything that's in this book with requirements, so.
I completely, I get that, but if there's a unit price for fencing of $40 a foot, and they're saying that they're gonna give you a $10 a foot credit, then it's at least
Yeah.
something to go to the
Yes,
table and
we
say,
have
okay,
that.
well, this
You
isn't
know,
that
yeah.
cheap.
We have that. That we have.
I think some of the requests for, changing the sub-base material underneath the parking lot, we wouldn't have a unit price to adjust that, if we decided to reduce that quantity.
And we did not get a unit price for the pavement, to take the pavement out.
But all of the potential scope revisions that were tabled or were discussed were tabled. There's no open issue in terms of, can we not pave a parking lot, or can we not do the landscaping? I mean, we vetted through all of those at the committee level, and the scope on the drawing is the scope that the town has directed us to proceed with. So in terms, there is no value engineering, because it is the scope that was requested.
And it's safe to say that whoever knows that a little bit at this point.
Yeah, those numbers are public. I mean, if we went back.
Kind of the opening thing, they're a little bit.
No, I understand.
They knew that they were a little bit, and they knew they were over our budget. That's the first thing we talked about, the school reviews. They were way over what we had.
I think, and I can be corrected here, so let me know. I think what we're dealing with here is a little bit of we need to regain a little confidence from an estimation perspective, and having some additional conversations with some other stakeholders, just making sure we're completely 100% aligned. And if we have a week or so of play in the timeline to be able to allow us to do that, I think that would be worth our effort to do so. Meaning it's not going to hurt us. There's no risk in us doing that, if I understand this correctly, as long as we can line up the conversations, make sure that we answer all questions, so that there's no point of communication, and basically we'd be back at the table next Wednesday to say, here is the budget, as you just showed it to us. Here's exactly the documentation that you just showed us to us, as well as that GMP, and we would have it all available and approved by next Wednesday. Is that
Yeah, I think you summed
correctly
it up.
stated?
I think you summed it up in performing that exercise would help with the confidence on the cost estimating side of things.
So
Peg, to your area of just taking time to respond, what specifically are the questions that are being asked, and to whom are they being asked? What's the information we gain between now and next week?
I think clarity, and I know it's based on O&G's bid with based on the revised scope, I guess we'll say, that the bid documents went out. In reviewing those, our engineering department just saw some discrepancies in either quantities or unit pricing or potential duplicates of things, and just wanted to have a discussion and go line by line with the cost estimator to see, okay, where did you get this? Let me understand this a little bit more. What was your thinking when you're connecting the stormwater? It's just those conversations, because when they're looking at the bid documents, which are the same documents that went out to the bidder, there are just some unanswered questions. And I think that would just help get some confidence behind. I know the bid is different from that O&G estimate. I think it would just get that confidence behind the estimating aspects. Does that clarify that, Michael? Somewhat.
Confidence in the building from the town employees.
Correct. The stakeholders.
Obviously, we put a high level of trust into our staff.
No, I'm not raising that. I'm just asking if there are other questions that the committee has.
I think it's more of the town staff aspect. of it.
Okay, that's, I'm just trying to understand the scope of what we're hopeful to gain over the course of the next week. And you're explaining that if there's an opportunity for the town employees to sit with O&G to walk through areas where there are questions, and that's helpful. There isn't anything other than that we're hopeful to accomplish in the course of the next week.
I actually think this review right here that you did for us, Mark, made a lot of sense. We
very
heard a lot of feedback on that, so that was super helpful for us to kind of understand, okay, this is where we are, this is how it's working, and, you know, it's our first time walking through it, so any level of detail is helpful for us. So as long as we kind of get that last piece to the conversation, we know it's not gonna change any of this, we understand that, but it's just, I think, making sure we have a full level of confidence, key stakeholders are aligned, and then we're walking in next Wednesday without any conversation or, you know, not conversation, but any, like,
So
misunderstanding.
to clarify, if we, when you say next Wednesday, are you hopeful to have a meeting next Wednesday, Meg? And is that acceptable in terms of the, you know, it says that we need to sign this thing by the 15th. Is there a deadline of what, is that midnight on the 15th? What's the?
We
what does
have it
ONG say?
on the calendar, we have a new business item to cancel it, that we are now obviously going to take off, which means I'm gonna miss a baseball game. I don't know why it's scheduled, but I'm okay. I'll take one for the building committee team. So yeah, Michael, it would be, as long as, so we are held to, as long as we have all the, so we are, it's critical, now we're on a critical path here, that it is, we have to have the conversations we need to have, we need everybody feeling comfortable and confident walking into this meeting next Wednesday. Because if we miss next Wednesday, now we've got a problem, from a timeline perspective.
Right, so ONG is okay as long as we vote on that, and then does that require Kathy to sign it after we've voted? What's the pleasure of ONG, given that they've identified that she needs to sign that by the 15th?
Michael, as long as the GMP is approved, then we don't need that sort of early release.
Yes.
So that would just
We
come
would
off
be
the
covered.
table.
A vote from ONG's perspective, a vote from our committee is sufficient to move forward. You don't need any signed document.
And we just won't be able to bill until the GMP is settled, so we
Correct.
can't bill anything, so we'll be on you guys for that. And you can't take 9 months.
That's the next one, that's the next critical path that we've got.
I mean, I think in some ways it was helpful to go through the early enabling, to
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, I agree.
work out the
That's what I'm
kinks.
saying, yes.
So I do think it was helpful, and I think I also say that you would say this would never happen again, correct? Because you had incomplete design or, you know, those documents to the estimator, but going forward, we would never have incomplete, right? Because it would be, all of that
Everything's included.
design work would have been done, it would be complete. I just, you know, that I guess is my other concern, and in the future, this scenario wouldn't happen, correct?
We're not splitting up,
Yeah.
we're not splitting up the packages anymore,
Well,
right? We're not pulling work
The
out.
actual design document that your estimator used, which was incomplete, right? It wasn't that's what I heard, is that you had a different design document that estimator used as opposed to when you put it out to bid.
Exactly.
And I would assume what you're saying is going forward, you would never have an incomplete design when it went to the estimator, because these are going to be final designs. I mean, I just want to get.
No,
I would
I need
want-
to clarify that, because, if I may. So the estimate is done at various stages when the design is incomplete.
So this could happen.
It could happen again. I think that's the risk that Johnny is bringing up. That's why there's a design and estimating contingency. You have hired a construction expert to advise you on what the appropriate design and estimating contingency should be at each stage of incomplete design. It's higher, it was much higher in an earlier stage. Now we have more information, they shrunk that number. It is not, the design is not complete until it goes out to bid. So I want to make sure everyone understands.
No, I think
it.
this is helpful, Richard,
Yeah.
to be clear to this committee, because I think if we left this meeting thinking that, yeah, this was a blip or this was, you know, a unique situation, but if this is something we should expect, I think that's important for us to understand going forward. This was a trial run. And I know for all of us, we didn't expect these numbers at all because we saw a very different estimate.
Right.
It's all been explained, but you know, all of us are, relying on all of you to get the very best estimates possible so that we're not facing a situation. I mean, this is such a small amount compared to the larger project.
I agree. But I hope that clarifies that they're estimating incomplete designs that get fleshed out at each stage of the design. But they're not 100% until it's released for bid. But when it's released for bidding, then that cost and estimating contingency goes to zero. And the numbers are firm, like you have today for the phase 1 package. I hope that's clear.
Yes, thank you.
But I would assume as it progresses, the delta would hopefully also go down in what we see between an estimate and something like that.
That is what we have seen traditionally in this process, and I think O&G would agree. That is typically what happens. You will see that shrink at each stage of the game.
And just to add to that, the estimate was done on the schematic phase drawings. We then went to design development drawings, did another estimate, but not on the enabling package. And then we're in the process of doing another estimate. So the bid documents were 2 steps removed from the estimate that we're comparing it to. Whereas now we're gonna have a brand new estimate done based on the mostly complete documents that the architect issued. And it won't be 2 steps removed.
And another thing to remember too, in terms of this last estimate, is that it's being done by 2 separate sets of eyes. Who are gonna, and I know I've said this before, but who are going to agree on scope and then argue on cost. So while the design may not be complete, the scope at that point will be complete and agreed to between the 2 of them. So if there are gaps, large gaps, those will be brought back to the design team. It's some of the more fine tuning that will happen with the design as the design is really completed. But I think it's fair to say, by this point, the scope is complete. The 2 independent estimators will review and agree on the scope. So we'll have that finalized. And then at that point, the argument, if any, is cost as of that day for those individual.
Do you typically do that? Do you typically have 2 estimates at that point?
Yes. And that's why we implemented it, or we put it in the RFP when we wrote this almost 2 years ago now, is because once you get past a certain point, design development and CD, there's a large benefit there of having 2 estimators independently do this, and then it provides more information.
It's a long reconciliation.
Right.
between the 2, right? I mean, it is good 6 hours of
You're more than welcome to join us. It really is a lot of fun.
But it really does, the conversation is twofold, it's scope and it's cost. We just didn't do that before.
Right. So the scope wasn't.
The scope wasn't identified.
I think the real question for the committee is, do you want to delay the phase 1 work? And you've been advised by construction experts that there's a real benefit to getting it done this summer. And I can see that. But Johnny, I think, is one who is maybe still uncertain. I think maybe Russ is still maybe a little uncertain. I think that's the real question that the committee has to grapple with between now and next week. Is it worth the risk?
Is it worth the risk to implement the early enabling package at all?
I think that's the basic question. Are you willing to spend $2 million now to get the benefit of an early package, knowing that you don't have the full GMP yet? That's really the question, right? I'm paraphrasing what you're saying. By the way, I think your language skills are excellent. The message came through loud and clear to me. I'm just paraphrasing what I think I heard you say.
No, understood. I think where we are now is, I'm okay with delaying it a week. I personally don't think it's worth to delay anything.
Okay.
So if I had to vote tonight, I would be voting to approve this. I'm just being upfront.
Yeah.
I think just my one concern is, again, what was repeated, just maybe, a half hour, an hour with Russ to make him feel more comfortable, because we do take a lot of what Russ says.
Yeah.
We're confident in them, we trust him. So that kind of stuff, and that I think would go a long way, and I think that would seal it for me.
And I think
That's
even
really-
going forward from now, and you know what I mean, on to have more of a closer relationship with Russ and his team when it comes to the work that is going to happen in the next few weeks and
Maybe
months.
he should attend the cost
Yeah,
reconciliation.
we
meeting.
talked about that.
I'm
You're
sure
right.
we would love that.
Yeah.
I'm not volunteering for it, they'll kill me. I'm sure you would love that.
Yeah.
And with that, all of the documents that are being distributed to ONG for their estimate are available to your staff. So they should spend some time looking at these documents so that we're not, if they have a concern, it's on the drawings at this point, 97% complete. So if they want to review the drawings, they have them, and they should be actively looking at them now, not a month from now.
Right, exactly. Well, but what good is it to do with that, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and I don't want to see the estimates, not the detailed ones. I don't think it's in the purview for you to teach us how to estimate. Russ already gets it, you speak the same language, it's an easy conversation. Really, that's what we're getting at. You definitely don't want to send a package to us.
We'd be here all night long.
Might be some good information in there for you.
Sure. Oh, all right.
Okay, so the motion that is currently on the table is to approve the scope award letter to release Gerber Construction Inc. for bid package as we just reviewed. We actually never put number 30 on the table, so we're just have number 2 on the table. So what I'm actually going, it's actually out there for approval. So what I'm going to say now is that we're actually going to put a motion out there to table that motion. Am I doing that correctly?
Does that have to be the same to people?
No.
No, and I make a motion to table. G2, I'm gonna read it all
I don't think you
No,
can say
that's okay.
that, and then until the
Yes.
out. Yeah,
June
until
15th.
the June 15th meeting, correct.
Okay.
All in favor? Michael, are you gonna be opposed?
Sorry, I'll support it. Again, I'll state my position tonight that I'm ready to vote in favor of this. And if there's merely, if the scope of what we are hopeful to accomplish is to have someone reconcile items, I have no objection to being able to do that. I think that scope is fine. I hope this, just there isn't some other turn that we take, because I think the way this is laid out and the importance of this is important. I unfortunately may not be able to vote next time, so I have some mixed feelings of not being able to participate in that vote. But I'll support the motion to table it for a week.
Mike, your cell phone works remotely, right? It's good, because
What's that?
Your cell phone works remotely. If we do, it looks like we're going to this 15th.
Yeah,
meeting.
if there for some reason feels like we're, something gets scratchy, I will find a way of participating. I'm sure Meg will be sending me a message saying, can you join the meeting?
Be clear. Thank you.
But I honestly don't, I don't Anticipate that. If there's something that we can reconcile and we get a little extra money, great. If a person who holds concern for this ends up feeling more resolved about things, that's also great. So I sense that our committee is supporting the importance of this, and that we're working through some things that are helping us all to be more educated about the process and to understand the things that go bump. And so for everybody's benefit, my sense is this continues to be an important thing, as well as people having confidence about it. So I don't sense that there's a problem or a change of direction. Again, I'll do my best to participate next week.
Thank you, Michael. So
4.5 minutes, Mike.
Yeah.
Open the meeting, vote, untable, vote, close the meeting.
A lot of optimism.
I like that optimism.
Waiving all the committee reports, I'm gonna talk to Meg after the meeting, we're good.
All right, so I'm gonna take that as an approved to table the motion. G2. So based on that, that has passed. So that will get moved to our next meeting agenda. I have full confidence we're gonna have all questions answered and we'll be prepared next Wednesday to move forward. Okay, so so then I also have to table 3? Okay, so can I get a motion to table item G3?
So moved.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We don't have to do anything, so motion passes. Pat's just telling me for G4, we're not going to even gonna mention it because it's obviously makes no sense to move it to the next meeting, because it has to do with the next meeting,
So before we adjourn that meeting, because I'm assuming we did the pledge of allegiance, we had to vote comment.
Yes, that's correct.
Other than that, can we wipe the rest of the agenda and just leave those 2 items and do it remotely so we don't all drive down for 5
I think
minutes?
you don't want to expend the time.
No, I love you guys, but my wife is waiting.
I'm questioning, unless we invoices or anything like that would be.
We do have some.
Yeah, I mean,
But that takes.
No, but
that's not-
again, that's a quick thing, it's fine, but what I'm saying is,
No, we
is
work out.
it worth to do all this?
No,
For next meeting, and everybody drive here, when we can jump on our phone or computer for 10 minutes and finish it?
I don't have a problem. I don't, and I think we're, and I think that makes sense for everybody, that we don't do a hybrid even. It's like everybody.
just
here.
remote.
everybody virtual.
Everybody Michael doesn't have an excuse.
Yeah, that's not a problem. I think we can certainly do that. And unless something else comes up for some reason that we have to include, but I don't think we need to do even report outs or anything else like that. I don't have a problem with that. I'm just gonna add stuff, just. We're gonna whole conversation about the groundbreaking.
Let's talk about that.
We have a meeting the week after, I think.
We do.
Yeah, so make it quick.
Maybe that one can be canceled.
We're finding out, geez. All right, perfect. All right, so then we're gonna move right on to item H, so. Oh,
No, go right ahead. I did have a question, and I'm not sure when the appropriate time to do it is, and that has to do with the operable wall you mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, at the moment, we're not doing anything about the operable wall. So we do need direction on this, otherwise it's gonna be a late item that may have to be addressed as an addendum item later.
I think we do have feedback, right, based on viewing, but I think maybe if we can go through it in the design working group session, does that make sense, Richard, or do you need something this evening based on?
We're not doing anything until we're told, so that's.
The
You're
long
saying that
debate.
there
where
might
we
be
are.
a need to have a vote next week on that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the sooner the better. If you want it included in the bid,
As
we
in,
need to be told.
okay.
I mean, we should talk about,
We can.
we have a working group meeting next week.
Before the meeting.
Before this meeting.
So let's.
So you'll be
Yeah,
in
you're
person.
not gonna say it.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. It's fine.
But we can do that one.
Yeah.
All virtually.
To be clear, the only action you would need is if we were adding it, if we were directing you to.
And how are we adding it? So one decision is we're not doing anything other than the fixed wall, which is what currently is shown on the drawings. That's one decision. Another decision is forget the fixed wall, we're definitely doing the operable wall.
Yeah.
That's another decision. The third is, God forbid, we're doing it as an alternate 9. I mean, we previously had alternate line, which was eliminated. This would become alternate 9 if you wanted to do an alternate.
Okay.
That's another.
And you would be ready to tell us what the difference is between a fixed wall, because that costs money.
Yep.
And then the difference between the,
That was estimated, I think, by O&G back in November, and I think it was a $500,000 price tag. You don't remember that?
We'll have to go back.
Yeah, if that
Yeah, I
can be
think-
verified,
I think we.
that's an important piece of the conversation.
Yeah, that would be in preparation for the design. Working.
Because we did visit, the athletic director, Scott Hurwitz, and myself, we did visit a school that does have it. I think the main concern was about, you know, do you hear noise from both places? And there was a cafeteria on one side and a gymnasium on the other, and it was full, both sides, and it was soundproof. You could not hear either side, and I think, you know, on the theme of flexibility, and we can talk, it was something that was definitely a very positive feature that we would recommend ourselves to the committee, but we can decide on how we proceed, you know, maybe adding that, and I know then it might be 6 minutes because we're so quick.
The only question I would have is, you know, obviously it's easier to say add it as an alternate, but then there's a design implication to it.
Right.
So you'll have a fee associated, obviously, with designing that alternate. So that the question, obviously, the 500 or 200 or whatever the cost is gonna come down to us at the final bid document if there's room for it and what we prioritize. It's really, the question becomes, what's the design fee? Are we willing to spend that to have that option? That's really what it is.
Yep.
So maybe you guys wanna just get an estimate of what the design fee would be
Sure.
to put it in as an alternate. And then that's really just to verify the 500 number.
Yeah.
And what's the design and is it worth to move forward? I
Yeah,
mean,
and then
it
it's a
should
cost
be,
benefit.
yeah,
Our estimators are actually working on a number for that, so.
okay.
Just to get us a ballpark on what.
Do we know what type of wall though? Do we have any information from TSKP?
It's a modern,
Skyfold,
skypole.
yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure we're. trying to.
Yeah, I don't know, Tracy might have called your office,
It
thought
goes,
that,
and it's flat,
not sure.
Yeah, so Josh. Let's see.
right?
They keep,
Yeah,
and
you said-
do they, how often did they share? Just curious how often they actually.
No, they didn't, they have two. They had one on the stage, so they can bring that down, and the stage is in the gymatorium. And so they can bring it down on the stage and have a classroom behind the stage, or do practice behind the stage while the gym's being used. And then they have one between the gym and the cafeteria, right? So it was something that was a real positive, given that we do use that gymnasium area. And that's why, you know, we kept it alive, I guess, for so long, is that we do use it for district-wide events. We do use that, and probably we would imagine many other events that we could use it for. But also there are times we have to have graduation inside, and it's very difficult for families to be told they can't see their child graduate. And so to know that it's a possibility and to not take advantage of it, you know, we definitely want to talk to the committee about that.
Okay.
And Kathy, I would just, I've been choppy on my service, but, you know, I could see it being used for district-wide events. We often host district-wide events at the high school as well. So, you know, a really great product when you're thinking about flexibility. I mean, again, we had kids playing basketball, we had kids eating lunch, and you couldn't tell what was happening on either side. It was a really nice product. I took some pictures as well that
They've come a long way, let's just say that. We have some of those features in our schools, and you hear both sides, but this was very different.
It's a very different kind of wall.
Yes.
Thanks, Richard. Anything else real quick before we go to motion to adjourn? All right, ask for a motion to adjourn, please.
Motion to adjourn.
A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, and we will adjourn at 7:32.